Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you're joining from, I suppose, which we don't know right now. And welcome to today's webinar on the construction education skills gap, training the next generation. This event is part of an ongoing partnership between the RICS and the CIC, which is the Construction Industry Council, and is being run between the World Built Environment Forum, which was an event that RICS has been running for some time now, and the 2050 group of the CIC. And the 2050 group of the CIC is the young professionals arm of the Construction Industry Council. So we exist to help those at the start of their career get their voices heard across industry. And in 2021, we ran a cross-industry survey, which had a few hundred responses that told us about the topics of interest that are out there to young professionals at the moment and the sorts of things people would like to see change in the industry. And so today's event is one of a number of debate events based around those topics. So we also held an event in January around climate emergency and the CIC's climate action plan, and the recording for that is now available online. And we have a similar event on post-pandemic wellbeing happening in March, and there'll be a reminder for that at the end of this. But today's debate is all about the education of construction professionals and looking at the skills that we need to teach people entering the workforce. So I'm not going to say any more now. I'm going to hand over to Tim, who's chairing today's event, and I'm very excited to hear from him and the rest of today's speakers, and I hope you enjoy this evening's webinar. Tim.
Will, thank you very much indeed. Welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining. It's really good to see the turnout. So welcome to the RICS World Built Environment Forum webinar series. We'll be talking about the construction education skills gap, training the next generation, something which is very dear to my heart and to the heart of those on the panel today. My name is Tim Ibell. I'm Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Design at the University of Bath. Just to be clear, the things that we're going to be talking about today: what role should universities and colleges play in preparing the next generation of construction professionals? What are the skills required by new entrants into the industry? Has the higher education system got the balance right between academic and practical skills? How are skills around issues such as climate change and biodiversity being addressed? And what is the education system doing well, and what could it improve? So those are the sorts of things we're going to be talking about. So very briefly, as I said, I'm Tim Ibell. I'm Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Design at the University of Bath. I'm a past president of the Institution of Structural Engineers. Up until very recently, I chaired the Joint Board of Moderators, which is the accreditation body for civil engineering in the UK, and also up until very recently, I chaired the Structural Awards jury for the Institution of Structural Engineers. I'm going to ask my panelists, please, to introduce yourselves. Can I start with Robert, please?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, Robert Hairstans, Professor at Edinburgh Napier University. Focus area really is on timber technologies, industrialised timber construction, off-site prefabrication, etc. Also, currently the founding director for the Centre for Advanced Timber Technology at the New Model Institute for Technology and Engineering, which is a startup higher education institute in Hereford.
Brilliant, thanks, Robert. Lindsey.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for asking me to be on the panel. I'm Lindsey Richards. I'm currently the Vice President for the RTPI. Great honour to represent the profession. And next year I will take up the presidential role. I'm also the Vice Chair of the Education and Learning, the Lifelong Learning Committee. Again, that has a delegated authority for looking and working with the planning schools around accreditation. My day job, I'm Head of Planning at Homes England, but also part of that is as Head of Profession. And I say that, and that's really important for us at the agency. We have a number of Heads of Profession. We work collaboratively together to make sure that we have an understanding of the various disciplines ready for development process, really.
Thank you, Lindsey. Helen.
Thanks, Tim, and yes, thanks again. Also, it was a really great opportunity to have a discussion about this really important and very large subject area. So I'm an architect. I'm a director at Brownrigg, and I've been involved in engaging with education for quite a long time. I've got a background on the RIBA, on council and board, and I'm now a fellow, and I'm champion for apprenticeships for the RIBA, and we were really involved as a practice in setting up the modern apprenticeships in architecture. And I'm engaged directly with universities, mostly currently as a Part 3 professional practice examiner, which I think is the best CPD that any of us could possibly do. So I recommend people getting involved in that. But I'm really interested in this in terms of obviously recruitment into the profession, but also maintaining skills for our existing professionals in the practice. And we obviously recruit architects, but we also recruit interior designers, technologists, and a whole range of specialists, including engineers more quite recently, because we're really seeing that need to have a bit more diversity in our expertise. So I think this will be a really interesting discussion today.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Helen. And Alex, whose camera is not functioning.
Might be able to make it work, hopefully. I'm Alex Woodcroft. I'm the director at KIN, who are a small specialist practice involved in often very challenging sustainable net zero projects, including retrofit and the challenge of the challenges, and sort of development and housing specifically. And I've been involved in various initiatives, including the RIBA Sustainable Futures Group and LETI over the years, and I'm a core member of the climate framework, which I guess is the other hat I've got on today. In the climate framework, we work very closely with CIC and professional institutes to help create and onboard PIs into using a common framework for education across the industry around climate action.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Alex. So we're acutely aware that people are going to be listening to discussions going on, and if you have any comments, please use the chat. And please ask any questions you would like to ask. It's really important that you do. We would really welcome it. I'll try and direct those questions as they come in to the panelists. So please do engage in that way. We would really love to hear from you. If I may, however, I'm going to start with the prime question, which I'd read out earlier, but I'm going to repeat it to the panel, which is: what are the key skills which the industry needs from its new graduates right now, and how close or far away are we from having these skills? The acid test question.
I'm happy to jump in, Tim, and start the conversation off on that one. So, as I said earlier, I think this, it's a really big issue and a big conversation, and to try and focus, but my thoughts on this, I actually just had a look and to see, what are we recruiting for currently? What do we, when we put out our job adverts and our recruitment posts, what do we say we need? Because that's a really good measure for me of us collectively, how we've kind of defined what the important knowledge, skills and experience is, because obviously we're looking at all of those things. It isn't just about having skills, it's about behaviour and attitude, and that's, in some ways, that's more important, about having people who come in with a really positive, proactive attitude and a willingness to learn and be flexible and to develop and really self-motivated. And we find that those are the people that really do well in the practice, are the ones who are really curious and question and want to investigate and want to constantly learn, because none of us ever know anything, or everything that we need to know. We're constantly having to learn things. So I think that kind of behaviour is a really critical element to us. In terms of key skills, I think a lot of it is now for graduates, it's coming down to those simple things that have always been there, like ability to present, ability to communicate an idea, ability to represent, whether that's in hand-drawn or software, their ideas. That's all still really important, but we're finding that more and more it becomes unfortunately down to some very specific software skills, and the industry standard is commonly becoming Revit now, so those graduates who are coming out with any Revit skills, even if it's just very basic, are going to give themselves a bit of an advantage, because they've got a foot in the door already in the kind of common software we use. but also we want new ideas from graduates as well. So we love graduates who come in with new software and new skills that can make us even better. So we're certainly finding that there's a whole range of different software that graduates are being taught in schools of architecture particularly, and they're not wasted by any means. They're all really valuable to us, and I think we can learn from what the graduates are doing as well. And what we're looking at internally for our practice, we have kind of 4 key areas of skills that we try and develop year on year, and it's the same thing that we try and help our graduates develop as well. So one of those is BIM skills, so an extension of digital design, understanding how to integrate information in a digital context and collaborate digitally as well, which is absolutely critical now to how we operate. Another is sustainability. So obviously we're all, as Alex was saying, we're all really need to accelerate our skills in that area and our understanding of that area. Thirdly is project management. So we need to be good project managers, because a lot of our clients are actually project managers or contractors who employ design managers. So we need to be good at it so we can manage it ourselves. And the last one is just the core technical skills. So things are changing again rapidly in the technical arena, whether that's through regulations and standards, things like CDM, health and safety, the new Building Safety Act, but also just material changes. I think we need to kind of be able to accelerate our understanding of not just materials and products, but how things go together and how things are built. So those 4 areas are the things we really focus on in terms of skills, and anything that our new graduates can bring us in those areas, will just add to what we can offer to our clients.
Thank you very much, Helen. Really interesting. Are there any other viewpoints from our panelists?
I just think that Helen raised a lot of really good, interesting points there, and everything you've said resonates with a lot of the work that we've done with the sector recently. A lot of that was absolutely coming through. I think just layering on top of that, which I think you touched upon anyway, but I think that the whole climate literacy piece and moving forward in terms of the future challenges that we have, and repositioning what we're doing in terms of value. A lot of the kind of traditional approach and lowest cost, lowest quality and procurement models, etc. And there's a necessity to challenge that. And I think that's what you were speaking to as well with those that we educate, coming out with the knowledge and the ability to articulate it and challenge the norms, so they interrogate it and don't just simply accept it. And because ultimately we need to change what we're doing and change the delivery model, really because of where we're at in terms of the climate.
So, Robert, that's uncanny, because while Helen was talking, I scribbled down the word empowerment, and it's the point, Helen, that you made right at the start, which I think is so important. And you actually said it yourself. In some ways, you said it was more important, the behaviours, than anything else. And I couldn't agree with you more. It's that empowerment. I'm going to say the empowerment to say no. I don't really mean it quite as bluntly as that, but the empowerment to question a brief, and that belief that the client actually, this is global responsibility, takes precedent over your client, and having that behaviour inherent in you just feels to me to now be a required skill from our education system. So thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, so and there are lots of things that we're going to need to cover. So if it's okay with the panel, I'm going to keep moving in terms of prompt questions. The next one, which I've scribbled down in advance, is how could higher education be fostering a culture of learning to learn, something which higher education institutions often say that they do. So how could higher education be fostering a culture of learning to learn and being taught to teach, which is the other side of the same coin, as part of lifelong educational skills development? Who might have a view on that?
I'd love to come in on this one, actually. And I guess my perspective of this, I should say, is I'm obviously a sustainability professional working in the industry, not someone who's involved within the formal education system. And I'd also like to zoom out a bit, I think, actually, in responding to this. So we live in a world, we're talking about lifelong education, we live in a world with unprecedented social, economic, environmental challenges. We also have increasingly complex systems, whether those are technological or legislative, to navigate, which requires, we were just talking about, from Helen, really hard skills like, BIM and specialization, and also leadership skills to navigate those complex systems. And we're also seeing increasingly rapid change, which needs continuous and faster learning to stay on top of, so people stay valid and stay useful throughout their lives. And on top of this, the construction industry in particular is a very complicated industry. And it's got a huge part to play in tackling these sort of key challenges of our time. And it's also an industry with a huge amount of centralized power, wealth, and control. And we are sort of at the fringes of that often as professionals. We are often not really the people who have power in the industry, but we have an ear of those who do. And if we want a better world, or maybe possibly even a functional society or civilization in the medium term, we need an education system that actually enables a broad base of people to participate in tackling problems and doing good. And by education here, I mean all the way through people's lives. But the challenge is that actually our modern education system is still in many, many ways structured as a tool for producing workers to be used by capitalists. We teach children and adults to remember and produce far more than we teach them to question and invent and disrupt. And higher education, in particular creative courses, things like architecture and other design disciplines, tends to move in the direction of encouraging independent thinking, but arguably still we often don't go far enough, I would say. And I'd argue that we're still teaching people to be workers for yesterday and not problem solvers and effective citizens for today and tomorrow. And I appreciate there's a bit of a line here to walk between, workers and professionals and citizenship. But we as professionals live in this zone of being professionals, like doctors, like lawyers. Our end goal is to do good and do no harm. And I think this, as you said, we have to be empowered to say no. If we can't, how can we actually uphold our end of the bargain to society? So I think we need to see school and higher education and CPD all the way through people's lives as a joined up and continuous lifelong learning process. And also, as you were talking to in the question, we need to see it as a two-way process of learning and teaching that everyone is involved in. This isn't something that our elders hand down to us with all the solutions already, because as we know, we don't as a society have all the solutions already. We have to empower people to be involved in coming up with the solutions we need. So as you said, we need to learn and keep curious throughout our lives. And we need to, as you said, be taught to continue to teach. And I think we don't often teach people to teach. We teach people to absorb information and then use it. And that upskilling and sharing of knowledge is really, really powerful and really important. We can do some of this in formal education, but we also need workplaces and community cultures that enable us to actually reward learning, teaching, questioning, and disruption. Some of the most eye-opening moments in my education, whether that was in primary school all the way through to university, were when the assignment that we were given had something beyond the bounds of education. They were real-world problems with real-world people in the room, whether they were setting the brief or reviewing the work or actually collaborating. And in professional life, some of the most rewarding moments in my early professional life have been when I was suddenly put in a position where I could teach others and suddenly shape and steer a company or a project in a way that I didn't think at that point in my life was possible for me. So sort of bringing this together, I think this is about change in the sector and about what we need to change to solve our problems in society. But that's really hard because terms like education reform, skills, training programs, accreditation, they're all very dry, very boring terms. And we struggle with this within retrofit and climate action as well. The similar dynamic of how do we get people excited about the really dry stuff like ventilation rates or what level of diploma do you have? But we have to see this in the context that there's a lot of politics and rhetoric at the moment, which is really insidiously about promoting a very specific vision of education and skills, one that's passive, submissive, and non-disruptive. And there are examples everywhere in one shape or form. So, the public are sick of experts, quote unquote, or this is just another consultant's charter, or even the current kind of anti-unionism. or drives for anti-protest legislation, or using public nuisance laws to prevent climate activists from using why they were doing a thing as a defence in court. And I know those seem like quite disconnected things, but they are all actually about this curated view of education as not being a right to say no and not being empowering. So I think, to answer the question, what we need higher education to do is to teach people that education, knowledge and skills and the abilities to learn, listen and to teach others are tools of resistance, democracy, power and change. And we need to instill in people the ability and the passion to wield those tools. And we cannot do that without higher education playing a really critical role.
Alex, while you've been talking, thank you so much. It's incredibly insightful. While you've been talking, Rahid has put a question up, which I think is a fabulous question. Is we've got a real issue in our profession with diversity, and this goes across architecture, across engineering, across all of the professions associated with the built environment. In the context of what you've just been saying, how do we begin to solve the question which Rahid is asking, which is it's before the education actually starts, the formal education starts. How do we ensure that we are attracting into the education process in the first place a much more diverse group? While you're thinking, Alex, I've got one answer to Rahid's question. Rahid, I don't know whether you've come across this or not, but there's a group called Scale Rule in London. It's run by a guy called Phil Isaac, who I know that Will knows very well and I know very well. And it is exactly set up for this. It's deliberately set up to diversify people, youngsters coming into the professions of either architecture or engineering. And it's fabulous. If you haven't come across Scale Rule, Google them. They're wonderful. Alex, have I given you enough time to think?
I think so, just about. It's a really interesting question, and I think it's something we do have to solve, because we can talk all we like about solving the world's problems, but actually if the majority of the people at the global level, or even in our national level, or even in our local communities and neighbourhoods, are actually systemically excluded from the discussion and from bringing their points to the table in anything other than a very tokenistic participation mechanism. And we see this through both access to education, but we also look at it in the round. We see this through planning consultation as well. It is not about genuine empowerment. We don't produce housing with community-led housing as kind of the base model. We have top-down developer-led housing with tokenistic engagement. So I think it's not just about access to professions, it's access to everyone in the process, every point in the process, and not everyone in society can be a professional. But to answer Rahid's question, I think one of the key barriers we face is the cost of education and the length of time that it takes. I think it's encouraging to see ARB as recent thinking and sort of moves towards a more kind of vocational entry point system to architecture specifically. And it'd be nice and interesting to see other professions do this. Places like Germany have had these kind of models of craftsmanship and vocational entry points into professional careers for years and years and years. And I think there's been two advantages to those systems. And I'm not sure the ARB's reforms go far enough necessarily, but that's a whole other discussion. But there's two benefits that this brings, one of which is diversity in the profession, but it also, I think, breeds respect between craftspeople and what we might consider historically, and still do today often, kind of blue-collar working class people and white collar people, and closing that gap in understanding and collaboration I think is super important. So we don't have this hierarchical approach that you're a professional, you're a white collar person and you're superior to the blue collar person who learnt their trade on site.
Thank you, Alex, very much. Would anybody else like to chip in?
Yeah, Tim, there's a question from Neil Taylor actually, which picks up a similar sort of aspect, which is around do we be concentrating on secondary schools? Construction isn't one of the top professions, and actually I think we need to go earlier than that. And I've been, as part of my role with the RTPI, I've been looking at the really early stages curriculum, key stages for junior school, and within the curriculum, there are areas of, we understand around the built environment, around towns. I think what would be really useful for an early stage, which would help to sort of formulate maybe early careers, as an understanding of what those different disciplines do and what the different professionals do and how they should all be actually ultimately working together. So I think that would be, and I think it's earlier the better, and I think it's earlier than a secondary school.
Thank you very much, Lindsey. There's a question from Nick Allen about communication. I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to wrap that up in my next question, if I may, to the panel. And the question is this: how best should we be educating our students for the necessities of interdisciplinary collaboration? And by definition, that requires incredibly strong communication in an environment which is always current. In other words, we are dealing with issues which are current to today and into the future. How do we do that? Who would like to take that one? The interdisciplinary collaboration. Rob, I was hoping you'd say yes, knowing your background.
Yeah, I mean, it's really on point at the moment with, all that we're trying to achieve. But I think, yeah, and we've been crying out for this a long time. Much more industry engagement with what we're doing and what we're delivering for the learning experiences to ultimately be immersive. So that this is what the model that we're applying at Ignite. This sort of challenge-based approach, this problem-based piece, so that you're learning by doing. You're therefore utilising the practical skills that you acquire and applying them to that given industry challenge. Now, in that regard, what we obviously want to create as well is this multidisciplinary approach, so we're not learning in silos, we're learning together, and indeed learning from each other in the round, which circles back in many respects to, I think, almost to the first question. That there's a piece here about those that are being educated learning, but equally us as educators learning what industry want, and the industry learning what we need to do to allow the learners to learn, right? So we have to, there's a knowledge management exercise here in terms of how we take the information and impart it to learners in a manner that's understandable and practical, that they can work their way through it and apply it into the given challenge. There's a necessity for that challenge to be well packaged and to be pitched at the right level. So we talk about learning outcomes. So what is it we need? What is the given thing that we're trying to teach? How does that marry up with the industry challenge? How do we ensure that the learners working through that challenge are meeting with the learning outcomes that we want them to do or to ascertain? How do we do that such that it is multidisciplinary? So we have individuals that are coming in at different levels. That circles into some of the things that Alex was describing, that blue collar, white collar, etc. There's the practicalities of how you do it. There's the design and the detailing of it. There's a design for manufacturing assembly approach, and thinking about this in terms of what is the capabilities of the system, what is the capabilities of the supply chain, what is the value proposition that we want to create from that given output. And to me, I keep going on saying about value, but I think it's so critical because of where we're at in terms of sustainability. So it's not just simply about financial cost, it's about the embodied energy, it's about the embodied carbon, it's about the operational performance, but equally it's about the resilience of the supply chain in terms of delivery. Is that resource available? Is that a finite resource? And how's that resource going to change over time given the impacts of climate? I've seen that in the supermarket shelves at the moment, right? So there's all the complexities that are within the system that we need the learners to be able to embark upon that journey to try and resolve. And we need to give them the skills, the tools, the methodologies to apply that, and the ability, as you say, to challenge the norm, so that they're capable of going out there and challenge. And I love that what you said, Tim, about the client, because I think all the time it's the clients who we have to respond to. Yes, we do, but there's a bigger picture here, and sometimes you have to challenge the client in terms of what they want to deliver, so that you get to the right solution. And again, that's part of that educational process. So yeah, there's quite a lot within that. But I think ultimately, if we can break down the silos and we can get closer in integration with industry, and we can get the learners quickly engaged with that, and to do this, we need to have agility within the system, and we have to think about how we make this approach work and still meet with the relevance of quality assurance, accreditation standards, etc., and ultimately how that all needs to evolve so that we meet the needs of the future, and indeed the future generation that has to respond to it.
And Robert, in terms of Nicola's question, which is to do with specifically with communication and its importance, the phrase which I always use is we need to produce graduates who are covered in Velcro. That's kind of the phrase which I've used many times. How do we do that? How do we create that graduate covered in Velcro, which to me is completely wrapped up in being a prime communicator?
How do we ensure that they're able to communicate effectively? How do we ensure that what they're presenting, what they're delivering is, I mean, I think what we are trained, that sort of researcher base that we are trained, evidence base, making sure that there's a robust evidence base in terms of the messaging that's been promoted, so that what they're presenting at the end, they're able to articulate what they're presenting, but they can also underpin it with the necessary evidence to demonstrate that they have a compelling case for what they're portraying. So, because I think, there's communication skills and being able to do a slick presentation. That's granted, right? That's good, but it's more than that, because you have, when you're questioned on that and you scratch your teeth, beneath the surface and go deeper, you have to have the underpinning evidence base, and that individual has to have interrogated that evidence and come to their own conclusions to make that presentable. So I think we have to be able to provide them with the necessary skill set that they do that, and correspondingly they believe in the arguments that they're presenting.
Very good.
I think there's another really important related point here, which is that, and we talk about within the climate framework, hard to reach people in the industry. And I think RSCS surveyors are a good example. Project managers often are another. Procurement consultants, there's an overlap there as well, where making sure that people understand the impacts and the good that they can do with the work that they do. And a good example is RSCS cost consultancy doesn't by default include any consideration for carbon or sustainability necessarily. It is purely a costing exercise, but actually an early stage cost plan may have a significant effect on the whole team's ability to deliver sustainable outcomes. Or a procurement consultant saying, oh yeah, sure, D&B, crack on with it, may completely derail the ability to deliver good outcomes for a community or for the environment. But those people may not realize that by doing their default work, they have actually negatively impacted, or impacted one way or another, other outcomes for other people. And I think that's also a way that we can make people excited about their work that they do. Like, actually, you're a procurement consultant. You don't think you can affect sustainability, maybe. No, you can. Fundamentally, you can make or break whether this scheme is net zero, and you can do that on day one. You can do that in meeting one. You can do that as a graduate. As Robert was saying, understand what you present, really be able to defend it, and upsell the benefits of the decisions you're making. And I think that gets under the skin of progressive clients and will make change.
Thank you very much, Alex. Does anybody else have anything? Lindsey, you look like you were about to say something there.
I was just going to agree with Alex about that, but I think it's also around breaking down the complexities so that when we do engage with communities, and actually we listen to communities and we understand what their aspirations are and their wants, but actually what we can deliver and how we can work with other partners to deliver that. And I think, for me, it's key around listening to those communities, breaking down those complex messages, and actually continuing to feedback and report back to what can be achieved and what's possible. And that's the whole point, isn't it? Around making planning and other professions more accessible in terms of key messages and what we can deliver.
Yeah, can I just add to that as well, Tim? I'm just gonna one quick thing is about the word that's jumping into my mind is agency. So I think one of the things that we talk about quite a lot internally, particularly if people are feeling frustrated, is what agency they've got. I think people don't always realise how much agency and influence they can have, and actually just by being in the room and, you know, having a role and being passionate about something and sticking to it can make a massive difference. So, you know, I do really try and encourage that, you know, retention of that passion. So because I think people often in the industry have more agency than they realise. And in terms of engaging with, you know, young people and schools, as we were talking about, I think that's somewhere the built environment professions are incredibly powerful in terms of demonstrating to young people that they can have agency and they can have influence on the world around them. And often they just have no clue until you explain to them, you know, how that bench ended up there in that park. And until you give them that opportunity to engage and get involved and understand how design processes and how the built environment is delivered and all the roles and responsibilities involved, they just don't know. And it can even if they don't go into the built environment professions themselves, in the end, I think it can be really powerful in building their confidence in understanding that you as an individual can have an impact.
Right. Well said. Thank you, Helen. Can I alert everybody in the panel to Fiona's point, which is we talk a lot about architecture and engineering, but actually there's a whole bunch of other stuff. Fiona's right that how can we make this more collaborative across all of the professions which make up the built environment? And there is academic snobbery in all kinds of areas. Of course there is, which I've said more bluntly than Fiona stated, but it's true. How do we break that down? How do we solve that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry, but it's like literally what we're trying to do right now. I mean, these short courses that we've set up, and we're not credited, except we've just had to get on with it and do it, and we've set up a competency framework, etc., and we've built short courses off the back of it for the sector, and then the individuals that are coming into the prerequisite for it, for me, is they want to create value, ascertain value and create value return. That's the prerequisite, and they're coming from different backgrounds at different stages in their career. They're learning about timber as a material, they're learning about sustainability, and then applying that into a design challenge, which they then got to make. And what's fantastic about that is that we're having, you know, time served joiners, or we're having architects and engineers, and technical sales, and environmentalists that are coming together to learn about this and then apply it into the challenge. But the beauty of the challenge is that they learn from each other in that, and they appreciate each other's skills in terms of how to address it. So I might be really good with the tools and the practical piece, but I'm not so good at the design and detailing piece, or the execution, or indeed how you present the outcome of it and present that to an audience. But when you integrate that together and fuse it, you get such better outcomes, and everyone has a mutual understanding of what everyone else brings to the table. And for me, that's just so key, you know.
Thank you very much. Tristan's been asking a whole bunch of questions, and I've been reading them while you were talking there, Robert. And it's to do with lifelong learning, and it's to do with whether educators are making the most of our time, with our very precious time with our students, providing them with the sort of foundation that they need. Tristan, could everybody in the panel just mull on those questions? But I'm gonna keep us moving, if I may, and we'll come back to those questions in a second. I want to talk, if I may, ask a question about regeneration, and in other words, moving to the next step. So the direct question is this: how should degree programs incorporate regeneration principles, in other words, doing good rather than just doing less harm, to build confidence in graduates to be able to say no to degenerative projects? It sort of links with Tristan's question about whether or not we're actually doing the right thing with that incredibly precious 3 or 4 years that we have with our students. Who would like to have a shot at that?
I'll Tim, I think for me this is an interesting question, because I think it picks up a lot of the points that Robert and Alex and Helen have already touched on in terms of practical and actually what the academia they learn during the graduate years. And I think picking up on the learning outcomes. So, you know, the accreditation for, I'll use it for the planning courses with the specific learning outcomes. And I think there needs to be an acceptance, and there is, that those must be dynamic. They must change as issues change and as learning needs to adapt to actually address them in very current ways. And for me, I think, you know, when graduates come out, certainly our graduates at Homes England, they're averse to the meaning of regeneration, what it really means for those communities. But actually, there's this bringing together these softer skill sets around, because regeneration isn't just around the environment, economic, social. It's actually making sure that it's the bigger good, it's got a holistic approach, and we think really carefully, not just about resources being used, but where they come from. But it's around sort of having that dialogue. Again, I talk about communities, and for me, it's really important that graduates, picking up Helen's point around have the right attitude, they're able to communicate, and continuous learning, so picking up this point about CPD. And I think it's really important graduates understand that actually when they come into the workplace, you know, they're very current. They've got they have the latest research, evidence that they bring with them. And so I think us as employers ought to be creating these safe spaces. So our graduates are free to actually communicate, easily communicate, learn from their mistakes, teach us what's the latest in their research. And I just think it's around, a lot of it around a softer skill set, leadership, political acumen you can include, you know, in terms of being able to engage with local politicians and bringing everybody on board in a very simple, holistic and actually multidisciplinary way.
Thank you very much, Lindsey. So regenerative it's difficult, isn't it? We should, in my opinion, if I can state my opinion, I think we should have been talking about low carbon 50 years ago, zero carbon 30 years ago, and regeneration 10 years ago. And I think we're about 30 years too late with all of these. So that's the pessimistic side of me. The optimistic side of me says that regeneration now is really beginning to make its mark, just beginning. And I think it's such a crucial aspect. Does anybody have any other viewpoints on regeneration and how we might embed it?
Sorry, Tim, Tim, I was just going to, you're right, and I was going to pick up in terms of, I think when our graduates come into the employer place, working with local authorities, say, and understanding that actually guidance takes a long time to actually publish and to write, and it's right for them to challenge that. And I think you're right, exactly, we're not where we should be, and isn't that hopefully a graduate's place to come in and openly and safely challenge where we are?
Right. Couldn't agree with you more. It's a really important part. There's a wonderful article for those of you in the know, as it were. It's in the Structural Engineer, so not everybody in the panel, not everybody who's watching will have read that. I get that completely, but there's a wonderful article which was written last month, and if I can paraphrase it, it effectively says we're not going to be judged. We're simply not going to be judged on the level of ethics that we have today. We're going to be judged in future on future ethical principles. And we can see that all around us all the time, how things change, particularly with the Me Too initiative. So we can't look at present day issues and think that that is how we might be judged. We need to try and put ourselves into the future. And to me, that's where regeneration is. And that is exactly the point that you were making, Lizzie, that we have to allow for that challenge, because without that challenge, we really could be caught out. I've paraphrased that article really badly, but if you do have 20 minutes, go and look at the Structural Engineer to have a look at that article. I can recommend it to you. The author is somebody called Mike Bather. Would anybody else like to jump in with regeneration?
I'll just add a little bit. I'd be really interested to hear what Alex has got to say about this, knowing what he's been involved with, you know, in the RIBA and looking at skills in terms of sustainability. But you know, I only really know architecture training in any detail. But I think one of the challenges there is, you know, there's a huge amount to learn already. We're adding more layers on, but I think that historically there has been a habit of schools of architecture of teaching about new build a lot more and focusing on kind of, how to create kind of, some icon or some, some building that stands out from the crowd. And actually what we often need is people who can work with everyday situations and existing buildings and make the best of them. And I think there's definitely a need, perhaps, not to do more, but just to have different discussions and different viewpoints expressed as you're studying, so that you get that understanding of actually a bit more of the day-to-day of the things that we can have a positive impact on, rather than, always looking for the, big starry building that's going to get our name up in lights.
So Helen, I'm going to put you on the spot because I agree with every word you've just said, but I'm going to put you on the spot. And it could be a binary answer. Let's see how it goes. Should we be teaching new build at all? At all?
Ooh, I think in terms of teaching, you've still got to understand, how a new structure goes together, and there's still that element of aesthetics and what, bringing together new and old. And my gut, this is a gut feeling, there's still going to be some new building, whatever we do is going to be needed, so you still need to be able to have some skills in that area. But I just think for me it's that balance and the kind of hierarchy. That's the focus of where the teaching is, and I'm sure we're probably all guilty of it ourselves, of celebrating. Perhaps we celebrate and we award the wrong things. I don't know.
So I deliberately asked it that way around to try and no, it was very deliberate to try and elicit sort of more dramatic than I wanted it to be. But if you turn the telescope round, for the last 30 years, universities have been very poor, and I think I've got the moral high ground to say this. We've been very poor in universities in embedding retrofit as being at least as important as new build. And isn't it time just to turn that round and simply say that retrofit's where it's at, and that new build, every now and then, you're going to have a real opportunity to do a new build. Isn't that wonderful? But treated in that spirit when you're educating, rather than the mainstream part of education, which I think actually in many areas is still the mainstream, rather than that balance which you were talking about. Could I change? Oh, sorry, Alex, go ahead.
I was going to say, on this issue, should we teach new build? I think it's not so much about whether we should teach it at all, and I think it is about the kind of virtuous or vicious cycle, for good or bad, that we have between, childhood experiences and like younger schooling, getting younger people in, higher education, workplace cultures, social circles, and adulthood in the media. It's about, as Helen was saying, what do we celebrate? And we should be teaching people to be passionate, not about designing big, shiny, phallic buildings for the super rich, but where they get to do the sexiest thing, and then they'll do it. Why? Because society rewards them, because maybe they think it's going to make them as rich as possible as an architect, and we celebrate star architects, and that's where all the awards are. But actually, if we can have this virtuous cycle of celebration and teaching people that they can have self-worth by doing social housing retrofit, but we don't have that. And I think it's not just about what material is on the curriculum, but the whole culture of reinforcement that we build around our education system.
Yeah, I mean, just to chip in real quick was, if we are going to teach it, then it has to be designed for manufacture, assembly, disassembly, reutilisation, and making sure it's in line with circularity, and we utilise that resource and maximise the value of that resource as much as possible, and in line with that, equally moving away from the carbon intensive materials and focusing more on the renewable natural capital that we have available, such that the products that so retrofit should be square and centre, and how we're using more natural, renewable materials and regenerative approaches to that, and also thinking about the capabilities of the factory design for mine, but equally, it shouldn't be about end of, and if it is at end of life, then it's carbon capture and storage, and that's really complex. you can boil that all the way down to just simple design choices, you know, whether you're using a nail or a screw, or whether you're using glue, you know, and you need, and therefore when you're specifying a product, you have to be challenging that, because if you're designing in detail on that basis, then what does that mean in terms of longevity, but equally how that product will be utilised in the future, and are you maximising the value return from the resource that you're extracting?
Very good point. Thanks, Robert. Could I draw everybody's attention to Rob's point that he's made, that we should be talking about a competency gap rather than a skills gap? And as a backdrop, remember Rob's point as the backdrop to my next bombshell question, which is the whole concept of validation in architecture or accreditation in engineering. A hindrance or something brilliant, or something in between? Are we actually maximizing and optimizing our possibilities, which either validation or accreditation could be giving us, or is it a hindrance to what we're all trying to achieve? I've got a vested interest here. I've been chair of an accreditation body, so I have a vested interest in the answer. But I think I've got an open mind on this one.
I really quickly, I just think isn't it quality assurance? In terms of, yeah, but in terms of the graduates that we're producing, it's giving some quality assurance in terms of learning outcomes achieved.
Yeah, so look, you're right. I mean, and that's what it says on the tin in terms of what we're trying to achieve in accreditation. That's spot on. Wouldn't it be nice if it was so much more than that? That it was something where we, as accrediting bodies, we really worked with universities rather than were seen as a police force. And we worked with universities continually so that when they had their visit, it was completely impossible to fail a visit, just completely impossible, because we had been in such close contact all the way through the process. That, to me, is where accreditation and validation should be. That to me is the panacea. I don't think we're anywhere near that. But that's my personal take. So that the QA aspects are automatically taken for granted, and then we're just adding that enormous value which comes from people just looking at degree programs and saying, "Have you thought of this?"
I think, I mean, personally, from my point of view, the RTPI work really closely with the planning schools, with the partnership boards, continuous meetings, etc. So I would say there's a very close collaboration in my profession, and I just assumed that was carried through.
Yeah, so everybody assumes the same thing. And there are vast differences. It's really, really interesting. Can I go back to Rob's point, which is the competency gap? How does everybody in the panel react to Rob's point that we shouldn't be talking about a skills gap, we should be talking about a competency gap?
Well, I'll just jump in, Tim, and say it's something that we're starting to have to face on the ground immediately, because even before all of the secondary legislation and things of the Building Safety Act have come into place, I know Rob's referred to that, we are already being asked to demonstrate competency, and qualification alone and training records alone are no longer acceptable. So, you know, we're having to really demonstrate knowledge, skills and experience. And although it, you know, it can feel like a bit of a pain, oh, here we put all this stuff together again. Actually, I feel positive about it in that I think it's good for us professionals. That actually it means, you know we've got that information, we've done those things, we have systems in place that are encouraging or enforcing us to maintain our competency. We've already got those. I think it's the individuals and organisations within the industry who don't have those systems in place that are obviously going to really struggle. But I think I do a lot of comparing us to the medical industry. I remember having conversations with people at ARB about this a while ago, the Architects Registration Board, and that, you know, if you talk about a doctor, everybody knows that's a very generalist thing, and within the medical industry you'll have people specialise. So you'll have general practitioners, you'll have anaesthetists, you'll have you know, consultants, etc., etc. In architecture, we're just architects, and you know, it's very hard perhaps for some people to know what the difference between one architect and another is. And I think we are going to, certainly within our profession, going to be more specialised and have more kind of registrations and accreditations for specialisms in the future. And there's already registrations for conservation architects, client advisors. There's going to be a principal designer register. I'm sure there will be some kind of, you know, high risk buildings register. So I think there's that kind of competence is going to be formalised, and you know, that QA system that Lindsey was talking about is going to develop, because I don't think that clients are going to take our word for it necessarily in the future.
No, I'm pretty sure you're right. Totally agree with you. I'm going to venture something which is far more prosaic as an answer and far less thought through than your answer, Helen, for Rob, which is that, to me, competency. I agree. I think it is a competency gap to me, because competency to me includes behaviour, and my feeling is that I like the question a lot. To me, you're competent when you know what the right questions are. You're not competent when you know a few answers to some other people. Then you're trained. You're not necessarily educated if you know a few answers to a few people's questions. When you know what the questions are, and you absolutely know these are the first 5 questions you have to ask if you get a new project, then you're educated, then you're competent, when you know what the right questions are. And I think that we are a mile away from that in higher education. I think that we are focusing on answers. We should be focusing on questions. I'm convinced of this personally. Far less articulate than you were, Helen, with your response, which I think is a much better response. I'm watching time, and we've got 1 minute to go, and I've got to just say a few words before we wrap up here. But could I just thank so much the panel and all of the organisers in the background for putting this all on. It's hugely appreciated. Thank you so much for taking part, and thank you so much everybody for putting questions in the chat. They've already added a richness, which is wonderful. So thanks all so much. I've got a few announcements to make, if I may, just before we wrap up. We will be recording. We have been recording this, and it will be published, the seminar. So do please share that with your professional networks when it's made available. Please let us know what you thought of today's today's session. There will immediately after this there will be a few questions on the screen, so please do engage with that. On the 29th of March, between 4 and 5, there will be another CIC 2050 group debate, which is hosted by the WBEF. And in that seminar, the discussion point is post-pandemic well-being of young professionals. Is that construction's next challenge? It's certainly society's next challenge, that's for certain. So please visit rics.org/WBEF to register and information on other upcoming seminars. You can also watch previous seminars which you might have missed. Also, you can follow WBEF on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and you can get all kinds of news there. So I hope I've done my announcements correctly and appropriately. So once again, panelists, thank you so much for your engagement and for your insights. Fabulous. And for those of you who've been watching, I hope you've enjoyed it, and thanks so much for your questions. Until next time, thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.